Thank you very much, Libby, for that introduction to our debate today, and a very special thanks to University Alliance and Microsoft for both hosting my speech and the panel debate which is going to follow later on. I start with a slight apology. I've fallen prey to end of term parliamentary bugs, which has taken out the whole of my constituency office, my Westminster office, and I'm slightly worried it might take out part of the HE sector today as well. But I'm armed with peppermint tea and lots of water, so hopefully I'll make it through relatively unscathed. So we're talking today, as Libby said, about graduate employability, which is a particularly timely discussion given the recent release by HESA of the DLHE data, and in particular some of the reaction to it. But let me start by setting a little bit of context. An emerging global trend around higher education is that it's clear that it's playing an increasingly important role in the economic life of all developed countries. So wealthier nations, which are no longer able to compete with the likes of China and India in traditional markets, are looking to develop their comparative advantages a bit higher up the value chain. So I think that makes higher education an essential part of our future success, not just as an export, which it's our 7th largest export sector, but actually more in terms of training, skilling and developing what is going to be our future workforce. I think the economic challenge that we face is immense. Our economy is in a recession, a double-dip recession of the government's own making. The full impact of the troubles in the Eurozone have yet to feed through. And the rise of the emerging economies is massively changing and increasing competition. So the increase, for example, in the number of Chinese graduates in 2020 compared with 2010 is almost as large as the total number of expected graduates in 2020 in both the US and the European Union combined. So as challenging, I think, as both the current and the future outlook is for us here in the UK, I think the fact that within 20 years we expect the global middle class to rise to around 5 billion people presents us with a real opportunity. If we make the right economic choices now, I think we can create the conditions that will enable us to meet that demand from the emerging and rising global middle class. And our future labour market, I think, is at the heart of our being able to do that. So today I want to consider the very specific role of higher education institutions in producing graduates, the performance of those graduates within the labour market, and also what more can be done to enhance the employability of our graduates in a very fast-changing technological world. So my start point for looking at employability is that if we want an economy that's based on high-value, long-term wealth creation and a more cohesive society at the same time, I think it's clear that we have to make the most of the talents of everybody. So in 2001, Labour set a commitment to get 50% of 18 to 30-year-olds to enter higher education. It was ambitious and it was right, and we achieved real change. So in 1999, 39% of young people went to university, and this grew to 47% in 2009, 2010. So I'm very proud of our record on extending opportunity, of our record on participation, because for us, extending opportunity is an economic imperative as well as a social goal. That's why I think that the government's changes to student finance are particularly damaging. Applications, as you will all know, are down 8.9%, and there are very worrying falls in STEM subjects, and in particular from students over the the age of 21 who often get closed out of the public debate because we're also obsessed with the journey of the 18-year-old first-time undergraduate. We forget actually the very significant contribution made by mature students. The Cora margin system in particular means that there's a high risk that good courses are going to be cut, with their replacements being allocated on price and not on quality. We've been told that Cora margin also works against the provision of courses that could cost more and need long-term certainty so that universities can make the investment in things like laboratories and training facilities. So I think the government's reforms are going in the wrong direction as far as extending opportunity is concerned. I think they're jeopardising the progress that has been made on widening participation and are risking collateral damage to local economies where universities provide a very important boost to local demand. In fact, the drop in demand for higher education exacerbates regional inequalities, which will make the rebalancing of our economy more difficult, though it's a very, very necessary task given the over-reliance on financial services and the 2008 crash. So the upshot of this is that there will be a very significant negative impact on the ability of our labour market to attain and develop the skills necessary for our future growth and our competitiveness. But I think the most fundamental point is having a degree really does make a difference to your success in the labour market, as Libby pointed out in the introductory remarks. So the recent release by HESA of the DLHE data has provided the usual opportunities for some to run their favourite negative headlines, both about unemployed graduates, but also about underemployed graduates. And the ever-present undercurrent to this is that there's either too many graduates or there's too many universities, too many institutions that are allowed to call themselves universities, or a combination of all of those. And I probably don't need to say this to a sector audience, but the fact that the debate is framed in this way, and particularly within these parameters, I think it's not just plain wrong, inaccurate on all the facts, but it's also pretty depressing as well, because you're almost always having to perpetually justify why you do the work that you do. And I think we've got to get beyond those headlines and the attitudes that underpin them and refocus on what the figures actually show, namely that around 90% of those graduates looking to do so are in work or further study after around 6 months of graduating. And there is no doubt that those who are graduating this year and those who have graduated in the previous few years have done so into a very, very difficult, very challenging, very fragile labour market. And I don't believe that obviously the government's macroeconomic policy is helping to ease their predicament particularly, and I don't think also that the government's failure to tackle unemployment, particularly among the young, is helping, because I don't think they see it as enough of an emergency, so it's not given the priority that it needs. But even against that background, although the picture is very challenging, actually the situation for graduates either holds up or is better when compared to the rest of the working age population. So obviously some higher education institutions are achieving rates in the very high 90s when it comes to the number of their graduates who are in employment 6 months after obtaining their degrees. But I was particularly interested by the figures produced by those who are at the so-called bottom end of those tables, particularly as one of them happens to be in my own constituency, which is University College Birmingham. Now, University College Birmingham has an employment rate of 81.4%. And the first thing that struck me when I looked at their figures was that although this might be seen as bad in the context of the HESA table, it's actually significantly higher than the percentage of the local working age population who are in employment, which in Birmingham is 57.3%. And in fact, my constituency, Birmingham Ladywood, has the highest rate of unemployment in the country. And I know many of UCB's students because most of them are drawn from my own constituency and they are my own constituents. So they are locally, that they are a very locally facing institution. I think this is a very key and common feature of those institutions, which also includes UEL and Bolton, which you could say are, on a cursory glance of the data, are underperforming when it comes to employment outcomes compared with the rest of the sector. But they are locally facing. They have a focus on local recruitment of students, and their graduates tend to join their local or their regional workforce rather than moving away. So given that additional context to the data, I think it's clear that these institutions still perform very well in securing better employment outcomes, and I think that makes them even more critical players within their local economies. And in addition, these institutions are major employers and therefore important drivers of regional economic growth as well. And in fact, across the sector, and I've said this to many of you within the sector, given the abolition of the regional development agencies, I think universities have a voice which is much more important, and in fact more important than ever when it comes to speaking for their regions. And this is particularly true for those universities that are locally facing and directly tied into local labour markets. So the performance of graduates from these institutions, I think, is much stronger when we consider the local context. And it's showing that in areas with difficult and underperforming labour markets, a degree still provides a very significant premium, a better chance of employment, and a better chance of career progression too. So I think we must all continuously and robustly challenge the negative and the inaccurate elements of this debate. We have to celebrate the contribution made by all of our universities, recognise those institutions who are locally facing, who take the students with the most challenging circumstances and still make a very significant contribution to their local economies. So given how important it is to look at regional and local context when you're looking at the employment and employability data for different institutions, I am a bit concerned that the data that's going to be presented in the key information set won't be able to give students the very much richer picture that they're going to need in order to be able to effectively compare institutions. So whilst I do welcome students having much more information at their disposal when it comes to making the very important decision of where they're going to apply, I think that we are going to have to assess very carefully how students do use the KIS. It's very difficult to predict, and I think probably on balance I'm still in the category that thinks because they're going to be paying much more money, they are going to want to have much more information about what they're going to get for it and what outcomes that degree might hold for them. But I also think there might well be a chance of information overload. So how students, and maybe for this particular generation of students, how their parents develop their information literacy, I think will be a very key feature of the new system, and it's one that we have to assess as the system matures. So let me turn now to best practice that I've seen across the sector and that I think shows through the institutions that perform best when it comes to developing and enhancing graduate employability. I think in a nutshell it can be summed up basically in the following way. Graduate employability at those institutions that do best is threaded into the curriculum and is not seen as an add-on. So in fact quite a lot of the institutions will often make the statement that they see this as their core business. And I think the other feature is that employment from employers becomes a real must, both in recognising employability skills awards, which different institutions have developed, assisting with course design, accrediting of courses, and formalising agreements for placements and internships as well. University Alliance institutions, I think, have some very impressive statistics in relation to this range of activity. They deliver 47% of all sandwich courses across the sector. 70% of the courses at Bradford, for example, are professionally accredited. And every course at the University of Hertfordshire is developed with input from employers. But I think it's fair to say there is good practice across the whole of the sector. Although my impression is that both the pace and the innovation of these kinds of activities is going to have to increase. So one of my questions to all of you today is to ask what more can be done to encourage employers to get involved. And it's obvious how they would get involved in accrediting courses or in developing courses, but I suppose for me the more challenging question is to ask how we can get them more involved in the co-curricular activities that form the basis of the types of skills awards that different institutions are producing. I think another developing area for enhancing graduate employability is the role of entrepreneurship, and universities are getting more involved in developing the skills and providing the support needed for their graduates to start a business, which is all very welcome. In fact, the National Centre for Entrepreneurship in Education reports that 77% of higher education institutions support students and graduates in creating new business ventures. It's becoming a much more recognised career choice, I think, for students, but there is, again, considerable potential, I think, for further expansion. So given that 43% of employment in active graduate startups is, again, in alliance startups, which equates to around 4,200 jobs, and that turnover from alliance grad startups accounts for over half of turnover across the sector, another obvious question for some of you today from alliance institutions is to ask, what is it that your group of universities is doing right, and how can we replicate that elsewhere? The increased focus on graduate employability and employment outcomes, I think means that strategies for enhancing employability cannot stand still. So beyond the measures that I've already discussed, which I think present themselves, as I said, in some way, shape or form across the sector, across most of the sector, I think there's two emerging areas within which we need to see, and within which I think we will see more work being done with the view and the aim of enhancing graduate employability. I think the first is the increased use of alumni networks, university alumni networks. Usually a group of people only called on at a certain point in their life when they're assumed to have a bit more disposable income to help provide financial assistance to their former institutions. But I think that we're going to see a greater role for alumni networks to get more directly involved in building the employability of students at their former institutions, particularly, I think, by giving those students access to their own professional networks. But I think one key feature of this as an emerging strategy is going to have to be involvement and engagement of recent graduates. So, I have my former university getting in touch with me a few years after I've graduated, because by that time they'll assume she's in a job, she's got some money that she might want to put our way or a contribution to make. But my employment experience and how, for example, I qualified as barrister. Now, we used to call that the bar vocational course when I did it. It's not called that anymore, it's something else. It's already changed. So I can very happily go back and talk to students at my former institution and tell them what it takes to qualify as a barrister, but my information is going to be out of date. So getting more recent graduates engaged and involved, I think, is a very important strategy that higher education institutions are going to have to focus on much more, because those individuals are going to be more closely aligned to what employers are looking for, and what new employees are going to be facing when they enter the labour market. The second area that I think is a growth area, if you like, for enhancing graduate employability is the increased use of mentoring. But in particular, I think I wouldn't just say mentoring in terms of helping with forms and interview technique and the rest. I think mentoring that focuses on developing what I term emotional resilience. These are actually the so-called soft skills, a phrase which I hate because I think if it's a skill you don't have, it's not soft. It's actually very, very hard and difficult. I'm not sure it's a skill either. I think it's probably more of an attribute. But however you describe it, I think it's that key set of attributes that align themselves to a general and broader sense of emotional well-being. The all-party parliamentary group on social mobility recently produced an interim report called The 7 Key Truths About Social Mobility. And in that report, they highlighted the importance of emotional well-being and resilience in equipping students to meet the challenges that they are going to face on their social mobility journey. They found that developing social and emotional skills gives young people the resilience, the persistence and the motivation to deal with the stresses and rebuffs of everyday life. And so they are key for those students to develop if they're going to be able to move up the social ladder. Well, I think the same is true for employability and career progression, especially when you look at it in the context of a very fast-changing world. So in 10 years' time, the graduates of today may be doing jobs that haven't been invented yet. We are living in an age where we have a continuously shifting, changing and technological economy. I was reflecting with Libby earlier on before the session started. I didn't use a mobile phone until I got to university aged 18 in 1999. Now I couldn't live without it. I didn't use email until 2000. I didn't use it in a very significant way until the year 2000. In 12 years now my whole work life all but depends on it. So I think that even if the jobs of today don't become obsolete, they are going to require new skills. So the graduates that we produce are going to have to be much more flexible and much more adaptable to make the most of the opportunities that come their way. And I think at the core of that, how you become an adaptable, flexible individual is if you are emotionally very resilient. So how I suppose is a question, how do we make this happen and how do we develop these attributes in our graduates? And as I said at the start of my remarks on emotional resilience, I do believe that mentoring with a focus on teaching students from personal experience and the personal experiences of alumni is a part, if not all, of the answer. Because I think if you have the opportunity to discuss challenges and difficulties faced by alumni from your institution or a group of people that you can broadly relate to, you can learn from their strategies for dealing with difficult or challenging situations. And in that way, I think you can actually teach emotional resilience. Now, I tend to be a little bit wary of parliamentarians who come at debates around education and higher education through the prism of their own personal experience, but I'm about to do exactly the same thing. I hope, though, it will have broader relevance than just my own experience colouring the way in which I come to the debate. And that's because I have myself been long-term involved in mentoring. So when I was at Oxford, I was part of the Oxford Access Scheme, and since then, you know, right up to now, I still mentor young people, either trying to apply to university through their time at university and also helping them to get on the first rung of the career ladder. And I used to start that kind of process by doing the standard, you know, this is what a good CV looks like, this is what good interview technique is, you know, these are the things you need to do to make sure you're ready to face the questions that you're going to face in an interview, for example. But I've ditched all of that and I've decided that the best thing to start with is actually to talk about things that are a bit more difficult and a bit more challenging. So the two examples I always use now to students and graduates that I mentor are, the first is my first day walking into chambers as a pupil barrister, where, and they're a fantastic set of chambers and I had a great experience and obviously I qualified as barrister, but when I walked in I was the only person of my colour and of my religious background in the whole of that set of chambers. I was also the only person probably from my class background as well. There weren't any other immigrant working class people at the chambers where I did my pupillage. And the first thing I say to the people that I mentor is that I found that even though I'm a very self-confident person, relatively unsettling. I had a personal internal short freak out about it, and that's okay. So, you know, finding yourself in unusual, difficult sort of situations and admitting that's quite unsettling is a normal part of building your resilience to those difficult situations that you face. It is difficult being the only one of your kind in a room. It's something you get used to after a while. It's probably quite depressing that you might have to get used to it, but that's life, and you can get used to it and you can still succeed. And the heart of being able to do that, I think, the one skill that I would say, people often call it confidence, but I actually think it's the ability to fake confidence that lies at the heart of the ability to do that. So walking into a room, projecting yourself, projecting your voice, standing tall, standing straight, making lots of eye contact. I think that those are very key physical things you can do with yourself to imply and fake confidence when you do not feel it. And the second example I use, and I've used this very recently actually with a group of women who have had families or have taken career breaks and are now looking to get back into the labour market and are trying to think about how they might make certain choices, is that you have to really know yourself. And the example I use from my own life is my decision to ditch my career as a barrister, having worked so very hard to get there, and to try and make it as a politician instead, and to seek selection as a Labour candidate from Birmingham Ladywood. And the reason I did that, having dismissed it and thought, you know, on paper, this is a very silly decision. I'm 26 years old. I was still shy of my 27th birthday when I got selected. You know, I'm way too young. I'm never going to win. But I saw, so I was watching the 10 o'clock news, and there were lots of politicians on there, you know, talking about their constituencies. And it just suddenly struck me that, you know, one day I might be watching my telly, watching the MP for Ladywood, thinking that might have been me. And I knew myself well enough to know that would be a very bad thing, and I wouldn't want to live with that kind of regret. So I thought, here's an opportunity, I have nothing to lose, I'm going to grab it. But it's that self-knowledge that I think lies at the heart of your resilience and your ability to, and some people would say take a risk. I think it's much more grabbing an opportunity that comes your way and making the most of it, even if it doesn't work out, but still knowing that you did the right thing, and therefore being very practical about the things that you might learn from that journey as well. So those are, I mean, those are just two of the things that I use, but you know, everybody will have their own examples. And I think that when you share those kinds of stories with students and with recent graduates in particular, I think you do actually teach and pass on emotional resilience and strategies that I think they can then use to cope with whatever situations they might find themselves in. And as with other strategies for improving and enhancing social mobility, I think that it's the same with graduate employability. It's something that is better the earlier that you start. So preparing for the world of work and enhancing your ability isn't just the responsibility of universities. I believe it's a responsibility of schools as well. It's a responsibility of further education colleges, and actually it's a responsibility of employers. I mean, this is really a bit of lifelong learning. It's something that you will add to, hopefully, throughout your educational career and then your career within the labour market as well, which is why actually within our own team and as part of our internal policy review, we're going to be discussing and considering these issues on a cross-team basis. So we are going to be working with Stephen Twigg MP and his team who are responsible for the Shadow Education Brief, as well as Gordon Marsden in the Shadow Biz team who's responsible for further education, and myself. So as we go through the policy review process, we really want to weave in employability and employability skills as a key part from the beginning of your education journey right through to the end, and then your employment journey thereafter. So these are just two of the areas where I think a new front is being opened up to enhance graduate employability. But I think in a fast moving part of the sector, much more will develop. And we would like to hear from you about the strategies that you're adopting and the challenges that you face as you help build the workforce that our economy needs. I think our collective challenge is to realise the potential of our graduates as employees and as partners in business success and wealth creation for our country. I think it's a challenge we have to meet, not just because social justice demands it, but because our need for economic growth quite simply requires it. Thank you very much.